Hmm.
So welcome to day 26 of our COVID lockdown chats. Today we're delighted to welcome Ingo Lambrecht on board, who is a consultant clinical psychologist with over 20 years experience and also works in psychotherapy with vast experience in stress, self-esteem, trauma, abuse and various mental health issues. Welcome, Ingo.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a great honor. You both do some really important work, so thank you for that.
Well, we're delighted to have you on board. We're going to go straight in with the first question. Hard hitting. We're in lockdown, we're in confinement, we're in isolation. First, can we identify the effects of social isolation on our physical, mental, and cognitive well-being?
That's a good question. Look, I mean, as you are aware that in prison and also in other situations, solitary confinement is seen as a form of torture. And so it's a very significant and serious event, especially if people do not have access to any other human contact. Having said that, though, I think we might need to consider that everybody has their own constellation of strengths and vulnerabilities. And for some, the lockdown will be worse at different stages as for others. So for some who are a bit more introverted, the lockdown might be a bit of a relief even, so that it is less contact. And others might even feel they've done this all their life. So I've had clients who've said to me, welcome to my world. Who have, if they've had significant cancer diagnosis and that their immune system is suppressed, they have to be more careful where they go.
Yeah.
Others who are maybe struggle with psychosis, for them too, this world is a dangerous one, and they suddenly see everyone getting on board with their own experiences. So it's different for different people, and I think it's worth recognizing that. So it has, for some, it feels supportive. For others, it feels incredibly restrictive and can, of course, have significant effects on relationships, both positive and negative. So for some, it means that families get closer. For some, we know that the call lines in regards to abuse and violence in families has spiked since the lockdown. There's a big risk that people cannot get out of the way. So for me, one of the factors of lockdown to consider is also the political factor, is that some people can afford social distancing. If you're really poor, like people living in slums and townships all over the world, there's a choice between the virus and hunger. What do you do? And there is no ability to socially distance. And the houses are overcrowded anyway. And, what do you do? So for me, it has both intense shadows and extreme light. And it'll depend on the circumstances and what it means for people. I mean, there might be just a beginning, a ramble, but maybe you've got some questions. We can target this more specifically.
No, I'm also what I'm hearing is that it affects everybody in very different ways. And also I'm thinking about our listeners who are in very different situations. We've got essential workers that are disconnected from their loved ones. We've got the elderly that are not having visits. We've got children that are not at school. We've got mothers maybe that need to connect with adults. And we've got teenagers whose peer group are very important as well. And everybody, as you say, is in a very different situation and will face their own struggles. Do you think there's a difference in the situation because it was a sudden, almost unannounced situation? Thinking about the elderly in care homes, those that are going to prison, there's a sense of warning attached to it, but there was such a sudden move into lockdown. Does that have an impact as well?
I think totally. And I was reading about some people, because there was a lot of push in the media and everywhere, even amongst health professionals, that people should get organized and should just carry on working as if normal and just push productivity, stay focused. Whereas in fact, the people who've been in solitary confinement often say, just slow down. Just take the first week to just let this settle in. So I like your question because it raises the difficulty of adjustment. That when a sudden lockdown happens, I mean, I remember myself having to frantically adjust in terms of thinking about how to work with certain clients, how to get my stuff sorted, and all of that. It created, I know in the hospital where I still work, an intense activity, so there was a lot of tension and stress, and very little time to prepare. In fact, I noticed that in the hospital that only the preparations were maybe finished just before Easter. And the intensity around that was such that people were quite exhausted around Easter. The essential workers at hospital. But in other situations might have been similar. You cannot prepare saying goodbye to your grandmother that you won't see for 4 weeks.
Yeah.
You cannot prepare to set up better connections with people who are, important loved ones. People are trapped here in New Zealand or overseas, So I think you're very right. More preparation would have been helpful and would have made the psychological adjustment and the relational adjustment and the social adjustment much easier. And it's but medically, was it wise? Maybe. I know that medical professionals were shouting for lockdowns because of the risk. But you're right, it is a big factor.
But here we are, Ingo, and we are now 3 weeks into lockdown, and I think it's going to bring about a lot of different things for different people. It will create trauma, grief, and but for some people, excitement and happiness, because again, there's always that polarity, isn't there? And as you say, there's lots of things to consider. There's the social, there's the economic aspects. And in New Zealand, we do have a huge amount of people living in poverty, and as you say, our statistics in domestic violence have increased, and there's so many tragic stories as well. So are there any strategies that you would recommend that we can put in place now as a nation, maybe, to try and help us through this? Because hopefully this week we will go to level 3, but we don't know. But is there anything that you can think from your profession that we can do to help?
So look, I am aware that those that are in significant risk can and must leave their bubble to get help. I'm thinking of women who are, at very significant risk, or young people, or whatever. And there is provision for that. I know that in some countries they're thinking of words, of key words that people under threat can say in a supermarket, like Mask 19 or something like that. The second thing is to call 1737 here in New Zealand. That is a helpline that is run by counselors, therapists, and they are really good at telephone consulting. And I think that's a really significant and important lifeline for people who are struggling, because it's always a mix, isn't it? I mean, there are people now who are going to be significantly stressed because they're losing their work and they don't know what their future holds. And that can have just effects of waves in the family, So that would be one thing to do. Another is, and again, it depends on the relationship that people have with their loved ones and with their partners, or if they're alone, is who can they turn to really talk things out. Now, the advantage of a lockdown is, funnily enough, you've got time to talk things out. That's the interesting thing, is that there is actually a bit more space to explore. We're not rushing off to work. We're not rushing off for a social event. We're not rushing off to go shopping. We actually have a bit of time to explore things more deeply. And that's the advantage of a retreat, of a settling in. So the advantage of talking things through, taking time, connecting in that way, that would be an advantage to do some of this work that it might require. And to do it gently, please, with lots of kindness, because we have no space to go to. Time out helps too, that if you're feeling like really you're bursting, or people who find their emotions are hard to control or to regulate, go for a brisk walk. That's the one thing we still can do. Get out, diffuse it, get rid of the tension and come back. Look after the place where we live emotionally, and to see it like a space that deserves to be taken care of. Just like we do with keeping our stuff clean, how can we keep our psychological and relational space calmer? And if we do need to take it somewhere, can we go for a brisk walk with a partner and discuss things? Can we do things to look after that? So those are just some very quick but very direct things we can do. I would also use, there are two things basically we can use to calm the mind. Two things: mindfulness and distraction skills. The only thing that works.
Yeah.
The risk of also being isolated for those that live alone is the intense ruminations of thoughts. And we know that this is toxic for anxiety and depression. It's just, that's not up for discussion. But what is interesting is what works. And we know that being mindfully involved in something. So I suspect that's why making bread has been so effective for people. Just elbow deep in the dough. Touching it, working it, that really keeps you present. You haven't got time to worry. And the other thing is distraction. Distract. Keep your mind at rest. Give a holiday. Have a break. Yeah. And physical exercise, and this is especially for Joe, absolutely helpful.
And Joe, I see you nodding. Joe is in fitness training, aren't you, Joe? For listeners around the world, not quite sure why that comment's come. I love the fact that you talk about time and space, and time and space being healing. Time and space can also be our greatest struggle, can't they? But in that place, as you say, if we slow down, if we're in the moment, then we can find that place to connect with ourselves and what's necessary. For those people that want to use the time and space to connect, do you think that social media has been an advantage during this time?
I think, I think definitely it can be for those which are not present. So it's to talk to friends, to talk to family, to stay connected, yes. And I'm just going to say and rather than but. And the direct connection is equally important. So, for example, I'm finding, and I've been listening to my other colleagues, then when doing psychotherapy on Zoom, it feels more exhausting than face-to-face. And I'm not the only one who's noticed that you just don't quite have the eye contact. Even now, when I'm looking at you, I'm trying to look at the camera, and it's hard to read in terms of light. And so I think we lose something in the media, but it is still vitally important for the connection.
Yeah, well, I think it's because we are obviously balls of energy, aren't we? So when we are in direct contact with each other, when we are in close proximity, we pick up on each other's energy. It's like when somebody walks into a room and they're in a bad mood, they don't have to say a single word, you just know. And I think I get what you're saying, because obviously we coach people as well. And it's although it's lovely to still see people and to have that visual aspect, it is definitely more exhausting because you're having to think a little bit more outside the box and work a little bit harder on them connections. I think that's what it is.
And also funnily enough, I find telephone connection is actually easier because I can listen to the tone of voice and the melody of somebody's inner space in the words and in the speaking of what they say. It is sometimes nearly more intimate because you're right there. Whereas with Zoom, even the two of you now, it's actually not so easy to read your faces and your expression and the sense of how you're responding. But it is, so this is why I think the social media, I do think it's not there yet where it could ever replace or take over the face-to-face, the personal, being in the same space and time.
Can I just ask one question? Sorry, can I just go back to the whole mindfulness and distractions?
Yes.
Just for our listeners, because they're words that we all understand, but could you just explain in layman's terms to people who are really struggling what it would be to be mindful and what it would be to be distracted? Can you give some examples?
Yeah. So look, I think I give a little caveat. Being mindful, often people throw this at people and just to be mindful and then calm down and it'll be okay. It's one of the most difficult ways of being, to be utterly present in the moment, here and now. It's incredibly difficult. So it's really important to bring huge amount of compassion and kindness to this process. So mindfulness is the ability just to be present. There's no big thing about it. That if I notice the beautiful wave on a beach, if I pick up a shell, if I see a bird, in that moment, I'm just here now. But if my thoughts take me away, it's very difficult to leave those thoughts. And one of the ways to do it is through the body. And one of the ways that I find quite helpful, breathing is one way, but others don't find that so helpful because they start worrying about, am I breathing properly? Is it to the count of this or to the count of that?
Yes.
So being in my body, maybe if I go for a walk or run, what are my feet doing? What are my hands doing? Where are they? What's the space? Not to relax, but just to notice. And something odd happens. We just come, or so people just now, while we're listening to this now, I'd want you just to notice your feet and your hands. Just now. Don't change them. Just sense, where's the pressure? What materials are they touching? Your feet, just feel the gravity of them. Just sense them. And go back to the hands. Notice your thumbs, your little finger. Where are they? Just be there, just curious, like a scientist, very lightly noticing what's happening. And look, all of us have just subtly down-regulated, which is the key to the suffering that we often have when we get into a turmoil. Because the research is pretty clear. The more we can self-soothe and down-regulate and calm our inner emotions, the healthier we are. It's just what it is. We know this. Even animals know this. They never tell their young to just pull themselves together. They actually lick them, they soothe them. So soothing, calming the nervous system, the central nervous system, is so helpful. So the second part with the distraction, what that is about if I'm focusing on a problem or an anxiety or something. So let's say I've lost my job, and of course I'm going to worry about it. But what I could do, if I haven't solved it within half an hour, an hour, I could give myself a bit of a holiday. And why? It's not because this is not a serious problem, but it's to let my nervous system and my body recover. It's neurotransmitters, the immune system. And doing that by going into a different neural pathway and a different neural network, like music, like a movie, like going outside and exercising, I'm allowing myself to heal that neural complex that had to do with work. So the distraction takes me away for a while to just down-regulate this again. I'm not saying these things are ways of solving everything, but they are ways of creating balance and shifting. And maybe, when we're in a storm, we slow our car down because we want to get somewhere. So if we want to get somewhere, let's get there with my car intact. And the best way to do that is sometimes to slow down, sometimes to speed up, but it's being adjustable. And only ruminating about the negative or the bad or the anxious is hard for the system.
And that's really interesting, Ingo, because we've been chatting quite a lot, especially yesterday, about fear being a natural response and a healthy response. But a lot of people now in lockdown are also in fear of loss of businesses and so on. And yesterday we had a business owner on board, and he was talking about having a period of time between the stimulus response and the fear and our reaction. And that period of time we can extend. And it's actually what we do in that period of time. So if we put into that place what you're talking about, which is mindfulness meditation and being in tune with ourselves and coming into the present moment, we can heal some of that fear in that space before we respond. We can delay the response.
And this is true for also responses that have to do with trauma. So it's to give ourselves a bit of a break. Traumatic responses or traumatic injuries often result in our inner emotional system or central nervous system to be overstimulated or understimulated. And by using our skills, which whatever works for you, not everything works for everyone. It is about creating a system that calms down. The same for grieving injuries or grieving losses, that we need a break sometimes. And people who grieve well usually do that. They stop. So firefighters, for example, for very intense situations, they're quite good at actually sometimes disengaging a bit until they're calm and stronger to engage then with the memory of what happened. So it's the ability to sometimes disengage, in fact, at the right time, not totally dissociate, but to decide, no, I need a break now. I'm just going to work this out later. And then when I'm stronger and calmer, I go into it again. Whatever scares me, whatever I find overwhelming, whatever is upsetting me. And this kind of capacity to balance, to move, to dance this through, is a way of allowing my system to move through the cycles of intensity and calmness in a healthy way. Our system gets overwhelmed easily.
Yeah, because if we're constantly in that state, if we don't give ourselves that time, our body literally will, that's when we get ill, that's when we have panic attacks, that's when we just can't cope, can we? And our chest feels tight, everything just feels really heavy.
Yes. And that's so correct, Joe. And this is why exercise is another way to really regulate myself, because if I do whatever it is that works for you, I've sometimes asked people just to press against a wall really tightly, or to do the plank, or to do something that overwhelms me physically a bit, gets rid of the adrenaline and tension, and my system calms down. So these are things, is to be mindful and gently caring about myself, what's happening in myself. If I get overwhelmed, stop, rest, shift. And I'll come back to the difficulty, but I cannot resolve difficulties if I'm overwhelmed or underwhelmed, which means I don't feel anything, I'm numb, I don't care. Get activated. Go get physically more activated. Have a coffee, walk briskly, activate the system a bit if I'm too numb, and watch a comedy. Get into a different space.
You can never ever underestimate the benefits of exercise, can you? I mean, you know what I'm like, I'm a total fitness freak. The reason why I am a fitness freak is because I suffered from depression for 20 years, and I now do it for my mental health. Yes, I am extremely physically fit, but I'll tell you something, being physically fit makes me mentally fit.
I totally agree. And the research is going more and more onto your side, because working with trauma, they've realized just talking about it alone is not sufficient, because what happens is that the center of the brain, which is called the limbic system, is where our intense emotions are held, is covered by our frontal lobe, which kind of regulates this. So if I'm in the car and somebody cuts me off and I just want to smash their car, and my frontal lobe says, well, maybe that's not such a wise idea. But here's the point. Exercise reaches this part. The words alone don't reach the limbic system. So with trauma, for example, they have found that yoga can sometimes be better than all the talking therapies. Exercise can be much better. Theater, drama, arts. Why? Because they reach the emotions and calm them down. So I just want to acknowledge, Joe, that what you're saying is supported by research. And we are probably going to find that this becomes much more important. And so that's why even in our lockdown, being physically active and resting, both, is a very important skill that I think will make a huge difference. And people, I mean, I've never seen so many people out with their families. It's lovely.
We're very lucky, aren't we? Because we're in New Zealand, we've got the beaches nearby.
Yes.
Many people,
Yes.
though, that are listening are in high-rise apartments in different countries around the world that can't get out.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering then where they can turn to. Is it that they can turn online to do some yoga in the house? They can learn, I mean, even mindfulness, there'll be people listening that will think, gosh, that resonates with me. I've never actually sat in the present moment. I'd love to learn some skills. I'd love to do more of what Ingo's talking about. Can they go online and find some classes and lessons to do this, Ingo?
Yeah, so for example, Headspace as an app is an option. They probably on YouTube will find, you know, many free introductions into mindfulness, very simple but effective ways of mindfulness. They could also do yoga at home, and you can do exercises at home. And you know, and the best thing is to maybe do it together with somebody else. We now know it's easier to do this with others than alone, because, you know, we all get bursts of excitement and promises to ourselves, but it's easier to do it together. Let the family do it together, or some of you, you know, so it's to think a bit about doing it with someone, to sustain it as a regular practice. That's the key. And with mindfulness, I'm going to just give you a little tip here. Just try things for 3 to 4 seconds to keep the mind on something, not more. Do not think you have to be mindful for 20 minutes or half an hour. Please don't. Just do 3-4 seconds, then let the mind wander, then bring it back again. Little successes add up, because we often feel very bad when we fail with mindfulness, and people feel then they fail, they can't get it right. I want you to not put yourself under that pressure. And that's why I hope you'll find the guidance that is much gentler. It requires intense kindness.
I'll give another tip as well then. Again, the same with exercise. You know, don't feel like you have to go out for an hour's walk. Don't feel like you have to go and run a marathon. If you do it in the advert break, if you do 3 minutes, like the other day, my daughter came in, put on this TikTok thing. She said, Mum, can you just run around the lounge with me for 45 seconds? Okay. We both sound like nutters. We both like at the end. And it was great. It's exactly the same thing. Don't have to feel like you set yourself these massive targets. Do very small things. They all add up.
Totally agree with you, Joe. They all add up, and those little ways are the ways forward, not the big ways. Thank you. That's exactly.
Well, no, Ingo, thank you, because honestly, the tips that you've given our listeners are absolutely amazing, and not just for lockdown. This is just for every single day life, because everybody's dealing with things in their own way. There's lots of trauma, there's lots of grief. Life throws curveballs at us all the time, and if we can learn to be mindful, but then also have those really nice distractions every now and again, just to calm the body and move the body, then I think we'll all be a healthier nation.
And I would also add to that, sink into your heart while you do that, because we will need that self-compassion and compassion to others. If you do that, it becomes a bit easier to do those tasks. I know just dropping that in is just something that makes it a bit easier, because if you just sink into your heart and stay there while you're mindful, it does help. It gets you out of your head.
Yeah. Put your hand on your heart and do it at the same time.
Yes.
Beautiful. I agree. Oh, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it on day 26 of our COVID lockdown chat. Thank you so much, Ingo.
Thank you, Joe.